Going into the 2025 season, there are a lot of doubts about the Mets starting rotation. Are they better than we think? I'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. And we got another televised game on Monday with SNY picking up the coverage. We got to see what the Mets starting lineup might look like on opening day. You saw Francisco Lindor batting leadoff, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso. That's your 1 through 3. Jesse Winker was filling in for Brandon Nimmo in left field batting cleanup. We could see that. If Brandon Nimmo is not good to go on opening day, and I do have my concerns I talked about a bit on yesterday's show, Jesse Winker might get a little bit of run out and left, and I wouldn't be surprised if on opening day, even though Framber Valdez will be the ideal starter you'd imagine for the Houston Astros, the Mets might go Winker in a left-on-left matchup just for that opening day, ceremonial vibe. I don't know if he would necessarily bat cleanup, but I think he might be out there. Now, Mark Vientos was batting fifth. I think that's what you're going to see when Nimmo is healthy. Nimmo in the cleanup spot. Vientos batting fifth. If the lefties on the mound, they might flip those two guys. That's what the early reports have been. Starling Marte finally got out there for a spring training game, batting sixth. You had Jeff McNeil, Luis Torrens, and Jose Siri rounding at the bottom of your lineup, which I think we very well could see throughout the early parts of the season. In Starling Marte's first at bat in the second inning, he ripped a double down the right field line. Jesse Winker had led off the inning with a base hit. He tried to score on the play, got thrown out at home. The Mets got on the board when Jeff McNeil drove in Marte with a double of his own, one hopping the wall. That is 3 games in a row for Jeff McNeil where he's gotten a hit. Luis Torrens then cashed him in by going oppo to hit a 2-run homer. Torrens also picked off a runner at first base, so he really did have a great game on a televised broadcast after the Francisco Alvarez injury, where that was a big talking point. So shout out to Torrens for doing some things to excite Mets fans. And when you're talking about this lineup going off, it did come against Sonny Gray, a good pitcher. Granted, Sonny Gray did not throw the ball well. There's a lot of pitches that got a ton of play that the Mets were able to do damage on. Speaking of doing damage, Juan Soto led off the third inning with a home run. Then in the fifth inning, he led things off with a double. A few batters later, Mark Vientos came up with 2 outs, and he cashed in Soto and himself, hitting a 2-run homer. That was his second consecutive game with a home run, as Vientos has an OPS over 900, having a very good camp. Luis Acuna drove in the 7th run of the game for the Mets in the 7th inning, hitting a chopper between the second baseman and the first baseman. Some dude I've never heard of named Jonathan Henriquez drove in the 8th run of the game for the Mets, and they would go on to complete an 8-0 shutout, 12 hits, 8 runs scored. The biggest story of the game, though, outside of Juan Soto still being awesome and Starling Marte making his return to the field, is Griffin Canning made his first spring start. He was excellent. He faced 12 batters. He retired 11 of them, gave up a leadoff single in the second inning. That was it. Overall, went 3 2/3 scoreless, allowed just that one single, struck out 5, got up to 55 pitches, threw 37 of them for strikes, was eventually pulled, as I guess that was probably the line for him to get to at 55 pitches. But overall, a really good start for Canning. He had a little in-game interview where he talked about why he chose to sign with the Mets. He cited just great conversations he had between, the front office and some of the pitching development people, the health staff, all these different people in the organization, that he felt like he can get the best possible results by working with all these people. He talked about the technology, how he liked being able to see sort of this skeletal image, like the when it's not just video of yourself, but you're seeing sort of the stick figure version of yourself, and you can really hone in on your mechanics. He really thinks that helps him visualize what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong with his mechanics. He talked about how they'll alter and optimize your grips, and just basically how the Mets are the organization that he viewed as the best one for him to go to further his career. And when you look at what he did in this start, he kept hitters off balance. He piled up some strikeouts. He was able to show a really good slider. He has now added a cutter into the mix that he talked about a little bit. Maybe he eliminated his curveball. We'll see if he throws it, or he has officially taken that pitch out of the arsenal. He talked about being really happy with his changeup in this game. I thought Griffin Canning looked good. It's hard to poke holes in 3 2/3 scoreless, 5 strikeouts, 1 hit allowed, and no walks. I mean, it was a really good performance by Griffin Canning. And I think what he showed you is his ability to attack the zone. And when you give him some other offerings, if you are optimizing him as far as making sure he is sequencing his pitches correctly, he has the proper grip, so he's getting the right movement on each pitch that the Mets are looking for. There is a guy that has a kitchen sink approach that can get outs in the big leagues, and we saw that in 2023 and last year. While the results weren't great, as he gave up more runs than any other pitcher in the American League, he also was able to rack up over 170 innings pitched. So as we are looking at a back-end starting pitcher, do I think Griffin Canning can hold down the fort at the beginning of the season? Absolutely. Do I believe that Griffin Canning is the reason why I am more optimistic about this Mets starting rotation than most? Not necessarily. What I want to talk about next is why I have a little more faith in this rotation than I think the national media and just the general perception right now, why I'm starting to believe that the Mets have enough. We'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, Griffin Canning is a pitcher that I think we saw potentially, I don't know if I want to call it his ceiling. It feels a little bit cruel to say, but I think we saw the best I could expect out of him in a Mets uniform this year back in 2023. He pitched to a 4.32 ERA in 127 innings pitched, struck out 9.85 batters per nine, only walked 2.55 batters per nine. So those are really good numbers across the board. And granted, it was over 127 innings, not the 170 innings we saw last year, but he showed how effective he could be when he is right. I think that is as good as you're going to get, and I don't expect him to match 170 innings pitched because I think at some point he might get squeezed out of this starting rotation. The reason why I'm mentioning Griffin Canning at the top of this segment is because I got a lot of messages after his standout spring start on a SNY televised game where some of the longtime listeners of the show said Griffin Canning is your jersey bet for 2025. Now, I don't know if I want to 100% lock this in just in case somebody else pops up, but tentatively for now, we're going to call Canning the jersey bet. And for those of you who might not be longtime listeners of the show who aren't familiar with this, every single year since 2021, I have bet against a player in the New York Mets, where I have said going into opening day, I don't necessarily believe in this player. If the player proves me wrong, I'll go out and buy a jersey and happily support the fact that I was wrong on that player. This all started with Jonathan Villar back in 2021. I still think in the grand scheme of things, I was right, as Jonathan Villar pretty much washed out of Major League Baseball not long after his 2021 season. But for that year, he was definitely good for the Mets. And so I do have a Jonathan Villar jersey hanging in my closet. In 2022, I made my jersey bet against James McCann. That was a good bet to make. 2023, I bet against Tommy Pham. Not the best bet to make. He proved me wrong. I have a Tommy Pham jersey. 2024, I said Joey Wendell is not going to make it on the New York Mets. I was proven right. This year, the bet's on Griffin Canning. And as I'm following a little odd year, even year stuff, he's probably going to be able to prove me wrong. And what proving me wrong is pitching over 100 innings at a sub 4.4 ERA. That is the jersey bet. It's not that crazy for him to reach that. I think that is a good outcome for the New York Mets if they get over 100 innings at a sub 4.4, which is what he did in 2023, pitching to that 4.32 ERA. That's not bad. And so if he does that, I'll go out and get a Griffin Canning jersey. But with that said, while Canning and Paul Blackburn are going to be getting starts at the back end of the Mets rotation, and Tyler McGill is certain to factor into that mix as well, for me, the reason why I am more optimistic about this starting rotation than I think others are is because I'm fully buying into Clay Holmes. I think Kodai Senga is going to be healthy to start the season. And right there's two frontline pitchers that I think can carry the Mets at the early going of the year. And I believe in David Peterson to be a steady arm for the Mets, start to finish as their number 3 starter. A couple years ago, going into the 2023 season, I got out on a limb and I said David Peterson can be a number 3 starter for the New York Mets. And then he had a horrible year. Last year, he comes back from injury, and I thought, man, is he going to prove me right in the long run, or is he going to continue what he did in 2023, which is just struggle and maybe prove to not even be a big league caliber starting pitcher? He has been outstanding since last year. I think he's going to continue to be a steady force in the middle of that rotation. And so it's just trying to figure out a couple guys that are a little bit ahead of him. Ideally, you get to a point where David Peterson is your 4 starter and you have 3 guys who are ahead of him on the depth chart. But to start the season, I feel really good about Clay Holmes and Kodai Senga. Clay Holmes is a new pitcher compared to what he used to be with the Yankees. He still has the primary offerings that made him so disgusting out of the bullpen. A great sinker to keep the ball on the ground. Slider and sweeper to put righties away. But now he's added the kick change, which gives him a weapon against left-handed pitching. He's throwing a 4-seam now that he can use up in the zone to change eye levels on hitters. And he's got a cutter. Now, how much he mixes all those pitches in, we'll see. I think he'll probably settle into primarily a 4-pitch mix. But at times, you will see that fastball in certain matchups. Times he might go to that cutter a little bit more. Other times he might stay away from it entirely, and he'll look a lot like the pitcher we saw in the past, but with that kick change to be able to keep lefties off balance. I think Clay Holmes to start the season is going to pitch at a frontline level. I think he is going to be outstanding. I could see by the end of May, Clay Holmes has got a 2.2 ERA, and he's made whatever it is at that point, 8-9 starts, and he has just been exceptional. Like, I really think that he's going to shoot out of the gates like a cannon. He's going to be fantastic. Now, the league's going to adjust. They're going to get more tape on him. They're going to be able to understand his arsenal. And at some point, he probably will hit a wall because it is a massive innings jump that he's trying to undergo here if he is going to be a starting pitcher from the beginning of the season all the way through the playoffs. That is a very tall task to ask of Clay Holmes. But I think what the Mets really need out of him is not 6 months of being a great starting pitcher. It's, hey, be great in the beginning of the season when Frankie, Montas, and Manaea are out. If he can do that, and if Kodai Senga is healthy, I think you have a 1-2 punch that you can go to war with David Peterson being in that mix as well. And then if you get, at least decent back-end production from the combination of Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, and Tyler McGill, I think the first couple months of the season when you might be missing Montas and Manaea, I think you'll be okay. And then you'll have those guys waiting in the wings. And I think what makes this team really dangerous to me, and what gives me a lot more confidence than I think the general consensus is on this starting rotation, is I think David Stearns is exceptional at shape-shifting his roster at various points throughout the season. Last year, things opened up. What was the Mets starting rotation? You had the three guys that ended up carrying you wire to wire in Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, and Jose Quintana. The beginning of the season, Sevy was sort of the clear ace. Quintana got the opening day nod. Manaea was a question mark. As the season evolved, Manaea took a more prominent role as the guy for the rotation. But in the early goings, those were the three guys that you had, of course. But you also had Adrian Hauser getting opportunities. You had Tyler McGill making starts. As the season wore on, eventually they said, all right, you know what? We are going to plug Christian Scott into the mix, and we're going to promote a top prospect. And he had a little bit of a runway in May where he got some starts, looked okay. And eventually you got to a point where the Mets said, all right, well, Christian Scott has looked good enough. We think he's going to play a key role for us. But guess what? David Peterson is coming off the IL. And our strength right now is in the top three guys in our rotation. Peterson looks good. We got Tyler McGill. Our bullpen is struggling with this 6-man rotation because when you have a 6-man rotation, you got a 7-man bullpen. The bullpen was a big issue. So the Mets leaned into a 5-man rotation, and it worked for them. That ability to shapeshift throughout the season is what I think will set the Mets apart, where everyone is doubting this rotation. But what it looks like on opening day, it's going to look different in June. It's going to look different maybe at the end of July. And by the time we get to October, it could look very different from where it's at right now. That's what I want to talk about to close out the show, how this rotation could evolve throughout the season. We'll go through in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down those nets. Stay in on the action because tournament games are happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So as we look at the Mets rotation on opening day, pretty clear where they're going to be. Clay Holmes, Kodai Senga, David Peterson, that's the front end of your rotation. Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning, that's the back end. Tyler McGill could definitely be in the mix if it's a 6-man rotation, or if the Mets want to start the year piggybacking a couple guys like Canning and McGill or Canning and Blackburn, however they want to do it. And then after you get through the first couple weeks of the season where you don't have all those off days, you can go to that 6-man. We'll see when Sean Manaea can return, because there is a world where you can sort of just bridge the gap to Manaea, but he has not started throwing again. So how long will it take him to ramp up? I really think we might not see Manaea or Montas until, I feel like May at best for both of them. And there's a world where we might not see these guys until June. I don't want to put that on Manaea because his timetable was not that long. But when you don't hear things, like you don't hear, oh, Sean Manaea is throwing again, you wonder, because he's going to need 6 to 7 weeks to ramp up. And we just did that timeline for Francisco Alvarez yesterday. That is, 3 weeks into April now. Best case scenario, if he started throwing this week, if it doesn't happen until next week, he starts throwing the final week of camp. Well, all right, now we're potentially talking about May. So I don't know if we can necessarily expect to see either of those guys for the first 2 months of the season, potentially. There's a world where you don't get to that point. I would hope Manaea is a factor before then, but I just don't know. So as I look at the first 2 months of the rotation, I think this is what you could be rolling with. But with that said, the Mets have a wild card, and that's Brandon Sproat. Brandon Sproat has already shown that he can get big league hitters out. Now, he's got to go to AAA, he's got to perform, but let's just say things aren't looking great because Paul Blackburn isn't pitching well. Maybe Griffin Canning's not. My jersey bet looks okay, whatever it is. And I'm certainly not rooting against any Met. I want to get that clear for those of you who are new to the jersey bet. This is a way to try to create some engagement around a player that I'm not fully bought in on. And the hope is that they prove me wrong. But again, let's just say one of those guys isn't working and you need someone to fill a spot in the rotation. And Brandon Sproat, his first 4 times out in AAA, went 6 scoreless each time. You might say, you know what? Screw it. I don't know if we're going to get Brandon Sproat to pitch at a high level for us at the end of the season. So, hey, you know what? Let's call on him now. Like, I could see David Stearns going down that road where you're just trying to get to a certain amount of innings, right? You have a ballpark in mind of how many innings you want your starting rotation to eat up. And how do you get there? How do you get to, whatever it is, the 1,000 innings that you're looking for, or whatever it ends up being, the 900 innings. I don't know the exact number they compute, across the season. How many innings do you get? You get 162 games. You multiply that by 9. Yeah, it's a little of 1,400. Throw some extra inning games there, so maybe we call it, 1,470 when it's all said and done. How do you get to those innings? How many of the bullpen eat up? How many does your rotation get to? Bottom line, you're going to have to look at each month of the season as its own, sort of set of trials and tribulations to get through. And the Mets might need Brandon Sproat early more than they do at the end of the season. So Sproat to me is a definite factor in this mix in the early goings of the season. He could show up at any point in the season, but when the Mets are missing Montas and Manaea in particular, I will not count out Brandon Sproat making an impact early. But I have faith in Holmes, Senga, and Peterson to really hold down the fort atop the rotation, especially in the early goings, because again, as you get into June and July, I think there is a real possibility that Clay Holmes might hit a wall. Kodai Senga might hit a wall as well because, for him, he's coming off a year of not pitching. I am hoping and banking on David Peterson to just be himself all year long. And if he is, Montas and Manaea, maybe they're pitching and they're, fresh in June and July and they look great. Well, now they're part of that front line and you're sort of feeling out what you have with Holmes and Senga. And by the way, you still have Blackburn, Canning, McGill, Sproat, even a Blade Tidwell. So if Manaea and Montas are rolling in June and July, well, now you only need 4 of Holmes, Senga, Peterson, Blackburn, Canning, McGill, Sproat, or Tidwell. So 4 of those 8 guys, can they figure out a winning combination there? And then you get into August. At that point, the question is going to be, did the Mets stay internal or did they make a big move? And I think they have more depth in their farm system now to try to make that splash if that's what they need. If they get to the deadline and Kodai Senga has not proven that he's the ace again, or Sean Manaea is not looking like the guy from last year, or he's still dealing with some injuries, or if Clay Holmes has started to slow down and you realize, okay, we need a bona fide ace, see what the market has to offer. If the Padres fell out of it, maybe Dylan Cease is available. If the Diamondbacks fell out of it, maybe Zach Gallen is available. We know Sandy Alcantara is going to be available. It's just a matter of if the Marlins would trade him in division. But as you look at all the various teams that are out there, there's always going to be 1 or 2 that disappoint, and you might be able to swoop up a pitcher that can really be an impact arm for you. And I think the Mets farm system is going to be in a better position to make that type of a trade this time around. So you might have a new ace come August 1st. And then you still have all the guys that you've already, acquired and built out this depth. So I feel good about the Mets depth overall because when you factor in Sproat and Tidwell, I really do think there's 10 options that I like this year. I think Tidwell is a little bit more of a hope than an expectation that he's going to make an impact, because while he looked great in that spring start, didn't look great last year, and there is some questions about his control and really finding what his arsenal is. I think Sproat's going to be good. But you have way more options than I think some people are going to give the Mets credit for right now. And I just have the utmost confidence in Clay Holmes being great in the first couple months of the season. I have a lot of confidence that one of, if not both of, Manaea and Montas will make an impact that ends up holding true all the way through to the playoffs. I think one of those guys will be making playoff starts this year, if not both. I think David Peterson is going to be as consistent as they come. I think Kodai, Senga, and Brandon Sproat give you a couple of guys with electric stuff that present really exciting wild card options. Obviously Senga, you're expecting and hoping a lot more out of, but both of those guys have the ability to really impress and potentially be impact arms come October. So I look at all of that plus the Mets' ability to go out and get somebody. And I just think that this rotation is not nearly as bad as some would want you to believe. I think it's definitely a question mark. It's something to monitor. And we really will be looking very closely at each and every one of, Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill starts at the beginning of the season. And even your frontline guys. I mean, there's not a single guy outside of David Peterson that enters this year without a question. And even Peterson has the question of, will he do it again? But I think the Mets have more answers in the pipe than people give them credit for. And they will find their way to shape shift throughout the season, month over month over month, to eventually get to a winning combination. And my only question about this rotation, honestly, outside of the countless ones I've posed, but like long term, the overarching question that actually does concern me more than any of these individualized questions is just, will the Mets have the arms to win playoff series in October? And last year they were able to do it with a rotation that was subpar compared to what you would expect, right? Or what you saw when the Mets went up against the Phillies. You would have thought they had a huge edge with their rotation. The Brewers, not as much. The Dodgers at the time, not necessarily as much, but they had so much pitching in that bullpen that it really did not just level the playing field, it gave them an edge. But I would like the Mets to go into October this time with multiple guys that are pitching at the level of what we saw Sean Manaea, pitching at the end of last year, where you just feel great about their ability to deliver against any lineup. Jose Quintana was fantastic. Luis Severino did a great job. But once you got to the Dodgers, those guys looked very hittable. And finding the pitchers that can miss bats in October is what every team struggles to go throughout a season. But I think the Mets have the right front office to get it done, and I think they have more options than most people give them credit for. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. By Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.